Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, my review. Boy, the pressure to see these movies on opening weekend has really increased since we were kids, hasn't it? It feels like everyone and their brother saw this movie opening weekend and then immediately went to Twitter and Facebook to spoil everything. So I guess I'm a little bit late to this, having seen it kind of 2 weeks after it opened. But yeah, here I am with my review for anyone who is still interested in talking about this movie. So, I imagine your experience is similar to mine in that a few weeks before this movie came out, or a few months before this movie came out, you started hearing rumors that it was going to be a disaster. Like, there were all these kind of leaked reports about how it wasn't doing well in test screening, and they were still filming up until the last minute, and they were still trying to tweak this and that because test screening audiences hated it. And then you saw the reviews when it came out, and I did my best to avoid anything with plot spoilers, but I read a number of reviews, and the reviews were not good. But then a number of people, like, people you know in real life or on Facebook, started saying, actually, it's not really that bad. It was okay. So there was a very negative reaction from the initial reviews, and then actual audience members who actually saw it, started walking that back. I give all that as background because that was the mindset I had going into it. My own review is, it wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible either. It didn't completely ruin anything for me. It was perfectly serviceable as the last episode in the trilogy, but yeah, it wasn't great. I think whenever people talk about Star Wars, there tends to be a lot of hyperbolic language. Either it was the best thing ever or it was the worst thing ever. And I think what we as fans have to realize, or should have realized a long time ago, is that not every installment in this franchise is going to be excellent. Especially once you start cranking them out once every 2 years. Some of them are going to be great, and some of them are going to be average. And if you start kind of losing your mind every time something is not spectacular, well, you can't do that, huh? So you've got to just kind of say to yourself, okay, it wasn't great, but it didn't ruin anything for me. The franchise is still intact. It was okay as a last episode. So why don't I talk about the things that I didn't like first? Actually, there's a long list of things I didn't like, but the two major things, maybe three major things. One, it was pretty boring. The plot was a little bit all over the place, and I didn't feel like there was a clear narrative forward momentum, kind of the classic 3-act structure. I thought, okay, they're going over here and they're going over there. And, there was plenty of action per se, chase scenes and laser gun battles and stuff like that, but I just wasn't invested in any of it and didn't really feel like I was caught up in a story that I felt had forward momentum. So I was a bit bored, in other words. Another major problem, and this is a problem that the movie inherited from its predecessors, is the Force. It's really unclear what the Force can and can't do, and it seems very inconsistent from scene to scene. Now, this is a problem that I've had with most of the recent Star Wars movies. There was a guy called Mike Ryan who wrote an article for Uproxx a number of years ago, which I find myself in complete agreement with. And he basically said, the original Star Wars, the 1977 one, was not popular because of the Jedis in the Force. It was popular because of everything else. The space pirates and those dog fights up in space, and the space Nazis and the laser gun battles and all the running around and the rescuing the princess and all that kind of classic fantasy stuff. And there was just a tiny amount of mysticism sprinkled over it. If you rewatch the original 1977 Star Wars, the Force, it's there, but it's just a little bit of mysticism. And then Every movie since then, the Force gets bigger and bigger, and every movie since then, the Force can do more and more amazing things, until here we are, really, where the Jedis are essentially like gods. You know, they can do almost anything. They can bring people back from the dead. They can drag down huge starships with their hands. They can transport themselves. And when you have that much godlike power, it creates a couple of problems. One, it kind of takes away any narrative tension, because you're like, all right, well, she'll just come in with the Force and fix it. But it also creates a lot of confusing things, where you're like, well, if they had the power to do that in one scene, then why didn't they use that power in the next scene? And, you know, if you wanted to get a red pen out and go kind of line by line through the Star Wars movies, you could think of hundreds of examples of kind of inconsistencies with how powerful the Force is. But just a couple that are right off the top of my head from this movie is right at the beginning. You know, we see Rey levitating and having all those rocks kind of go around her. But in the next scene, then they're just sinking in the quicksand, and you're like, what? No, she doesn't need to sink in the quicksand. She can just levitate herself. And, you know, I know we're all okay in the very next scene. Oh, by the way, I'm going to spoil everything. Sorry. Spoilers for everything. They were okay in the very next scene, but it was still... Yeah, and then they've got this... the ship is trying to take off with Chewie in it, right? And Rey is trying to stop it. And then Kylo Ren is all of a sudden appears out of nowhere, and he's trying they're having this tug of war over the ship, right? And then you're like, okay, there's Kylo Ren, there's Rey, and then all of a sudden just off they go and escape Kylo Ren. And we know Kylo Ren has the power to kind of stop ships just by using his Force power, because we've just seen this demonstrated. But then off they go, and it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll do the showdown with Kylo Ren in another scene then, for he just let them escape for some reason. And it's just like that all the way through the movie, where you're like, oh okay, I guess the Force can do this now. And then you're like, well, okay, I guess apparently the Force can't do anything in this scene now. It's just really confusing what the Force can and can't do, and it just gets worse and worse every movie. The other problems I had with this movie, it's very apparent now in this third movie that they did not have a plan for this from the beginning, which is frustrating, because, you know, that first movie, you kind of got teased with all these mysteries, and none of those very few of them got resolved in the first movie. But you as a viewer, you kind of had good faith that they had a plan for these mysteries and that they were going to resolve them in a satisfactory manner. And then it's become very apparent with every movie since then that they're just kind of making it up as they go along, which I believe J.J. Abrams has a history of doing. J.J. Abrams was the guy from Lost, right? Where he kind of teased viewers with all these mysteries that you kept watching this show in good faith, assuming that this had all been planned out, and then nothing had been planned out. And it's, as other people have pointed out, it's frustrating that with a series as big as Star Wars, they didn't sit down and plan it out more. I mean, these Marvel movies have been very impressive with how they plan everything out well in advance, so that something set up in one movie pays off very nice in another movie. Why they didn't do that with Star Wars, I don't know. That being said, to give them some benefit of the doubt, apparently the fact that Carrie Fisher died did kind of screw up what they did have planned. So, apparently the movie 7 was supposed to be Han Solo's movie, movie 8 was supposed to be Luke Skywalker's movie, and movie 9 was supposed to be Carrie Fisher's movie, and Carrie Fisher died prematurely, and so that doesn't absolve them of all their sins. It still is evident that a number of these plot points were being kind of made up as they went along, but I'm sure that screwed up some of the plans that they had. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt on some of that. Now, what else didn't I like? That Emperor Palpatine coming back was was pretty stupid. And it was stupid for a number of reasons. One, he already had a very satisfying death in Return of the Jedi, so we don't need to bring him back. And then two, it's never really explained how they've brought him back. I've heard some people on the internet talk about some things like clones, but where they're getting that from, I don't know. I mean, maybe this is extra material that you've got to read to understand the movie, the tie-in novels or something. Because as far as I could tell, just from the movie itself, all he said is that, the dark side gives you powers to do things that some consider unorthodox or something like that. I'm quoting from memory. So, yeah, it's just like, okay, Palpatine's back, deal with it. Somehow he came back. It is the impression I got from this movie. And yeah, I mean, nobody was really asking for Palpatine to come back. People call it fan service, but I don't know of any fans who were asking for this. All that being said, I understand completely why they did that. Because Kylo Ren, in order for him to have a satisfying character arc, he's got to redeem himself. I mean, he's got to. You've got all this set up in movies 7 and 8. In order for it to have any narrative payoff, he's got to redeem himself. And if he redeems himself, then that's the bad guy done, right? So you need something essentially the same as Return of the Jedi. You need somebody who's a bigger bad guy than the bad guy, so that the bad guy can redeem himself, and then they can have somebody they can fight against at the end. Just like in Return of the Jedi, Vader redeemed himself, and then they've got to fight against Emperor Palpatine. They already had this set up with Snoke, but then they killed Snoke off in Episode 8, and obviously they hadn't been planning this out ahead of time. So then what are you going to do? Well, the advantage of bringing Emperor Palpatine back is you don't need to explain his backstory. You don't need to say, okay, who is this guy? Where did he come from? What is his agenda? That's already all set up. All you got to say is, okay, now he's back. So I understand why they did that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to let them off the hook partially on this. But then, this is another thing that bugged me. Then it's the exact same showdown between Emperor Palpatine and Rey that we already had in Return of the Jedi. In fact, they even go as far as to repeat the words verbatim. Like, strike me down and fulfill your... let the hate flow through you. I don't remember. But, it's the exact same dialogue you used in Return of the Jedi. Now, whenever you get into these Star Wars movies, and I'll try and talk about this more later in the review, there's a fine line between recreating the feeling of the original movies, which you want to do, and recreating the original movies beat for beat, which you don't want to do, at least not in my opinion, because I'm watching that and I'm like, yeah, I've seen this movie already. And I know what's going to happen because I've seen it already. It's just exactly the same as Return of the Jedi. I mean, some similarity is good because it recreates the original feeling of the originals, but boy, too much similarity. You're like, why am I watching this? And this was way too much similarity. And I was like, I've seen this already. And not only have I seen this already, I have, these Star Wars movies that we grew up with, we saw them over and over and over and over and over again while we were growing up. Well, we've got them memorized backwards and forwards. So it was just so boring to see that all over again. As well, while this was going on, there was a space battle going on in which they have to blow up the big bad spaceship. Which, boy, have we seen this so many times in Star Wars. I mean, this was the exact same thing that was going on in Return of the Jedi. They weren't blowing up the Death Star, admittedly, but they might as well have been. There was this big ship that they needed to blow up. So that was this plot of A New Hope. That was a plot of Return of the Jedi. That was a plot of The Force Awakens. That was kind of the plot of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. There was this thing controlling the droids that they needed to blow up in space. It was just boring. seeing all this play out again. Okay, what else didn't I like? The Rose Tico. So I know this is a divisive issue among Star Wars fans, but I was on Team Rose. I loved the character. I thought that actress Kelly Marie Tran was really good, and I know not everyone thinks so, but I just thought her smile was so endearing, and I liked the life that she brought to the character, and I thought the character was relatable as kind of like an everyday person in the Star Wars universe. And I wanted to see more of her. She was one of my favorite parts of Episode 8, and it was disappointing that she didn't get much in Episode 9. And then you get on to all the stuff outside of the movie, the fact that some of the reaction against Kelly Marie Tran was toxic. And there's a debate about how much of this was real fans and how much of this was online trolls. But something happened, and Kelly Marie Tran got so harassed that she had to quit Twitter, or she chose to quit Twitter. And so knowing that this kind of toxic thing had been in the atmosphere preceding up to this movie, it would have been nice if this movie had said, all right, you know what, all you trolls, we're not going to listen to you. We're going to take Rose Tico, and we're still going to give her a prominent role in this movie. But then they didn't, and it feels like they gave in to the online trolls. Now, I say it feels like it gave on to the online trolls because I'm not sure that that was their intention. I think if you look at the plot of this movie, the plot of this movie was really already full. And so I'm imagining that the reason that Rose Tico did not get a lot of online screen time was not for any nefarious reason. It was just because there wasn't room in this movie for her to have her own character arc. It was too overstuffed already. But it does feel like she got shafted. And as well, you know, there's the stuff outside of the movie, but then there's the internal in-universe stuff where, you know, it feels like she's getting set up in Episode 8 to be one of the main characters. And it feels like there's this romantic thing between her and Finn. And then it just feels off that got dropped in Episode 9. It feels off from a thematic standpoint, and it feels off from a character standpoint, that whatever was going on in her and Finn just got dropped completely. All that being said, though, to give credit where credit is due, it could have been worse. They didn't give her a lot of lines, but they did kind of give her a significant amount of face time, trying to cram her into the scenes where other stuff was going on, where she was kind of always there in the background. So it could have been worse. Okay, let's talk about the cameos from the other characters coming back. So let me set this up by saying the fan service, the term fan service, has gotten kind of a derogatory, well, the term itself is derogatory. It's gotten a bad name on the internet in the past couple of years. But I actually like fan service, especially in the sense of old characters coming back. And I don't think this is a bad thing at all, even though people call it fan service. But, you know, the whole reason you get invested in a franchise is because you're interested in the characters, right? I mean, you don't go to see a Star Wars movie because you like seeing, well, I mean, you go for a number of different reasons, but it's not purely about the music or the laser battles again. You go because you've come to care about these characters over time. So as you would with any franchise, right? I mean, the reason you keep watching a TV show episode after episode is because you care about the characters. And so if there are characters that you've grown to care about over time, you want to see these characters progress. Now, there's a balancing act in the sequel trilogy with trying to balance out the old characters and the new characters, but spending time with the old characters, I don't think that's fan service. I think that's just part of maintaining a franchise. That's why we're watching it in the first place. Is because we grew up with these characters, not because of any of the other surface level stuff. Star destroyers or laser gun battles or stuff like that. So, to sum up, I don't think it's a bad thing at all to bring old characters back. In fact, the more the better. I guess what I don't like about fan service is when the same plot gets repeated over and over again. But I've already talked about that to some extent. So Lando was back. Great. Wicket the Ewok was back. Great. Wedge was back. Great. You know, the more of these guys they can bring back, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Now, yeah. Billy D. Williams, I hate to say it, but he was looking old. And he is old. Go on to Wikipedia. The guy's 82 now. So, Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, they were all looking older, definitely. I mean, okay, Harrison Ford was looking pretty old. But Harrison Ford still looked like he was old, but he was moving. He was agile. And I think Harrison Ford is in his 70s, which is old, but, Billy D. Williams is in his 80s, which is looking really old. And Billy D. Williams looked like he had a very limited range of motion. And he probably does. I mean, 82 is really old. So it's like, I don't know. It was good seeing him back, but it was depressing to see that he's that old. But, he is that old. I think he was older than the rest of the cast. So he was like in his early 40s when The Empire Strikes Back came out, I believe. I was 2 years old when The Empire Strikes Back came out. I'm in my early 40s now. I've already got gray hair. If I was 2 years old when it came out, and I'm getting old now, imagine how old Billy D. Williams is. That's just the way time passes. But, I guess, not to belabor the point too much, but I guess it's like when you see an aging relative that you haven't seen for a really long time. It's depressing to see how old they've gotten, but you're still glad you saw them. I guess that's my feeling with Billy D. Williams. Wedge. Yeah, so Wedge is maybe borderline obscure. So if you're not familiar with him, Wedge is a fighter pilot who had played a minor part in each of the original trilogies. He was in the attack of the Death Star in the first Star Wars. He was in the Battle of Hoth in Empire Strikes Back, and he was in the attack on the second Death Star in the third Star Wars. Just about every scene he's in, he's got his helmet on. You almost never see his face fully uncovered. And he's somewhat of a minor role, but he's in all those movies. I never actually figured out who he was until I was in high school. And I was watching the movies with some of my friends. And they pointed out to me that the same fighter pilot was in all three of these movies. And I was like, oh, all right. It's been the same guy. And because of that because it's kind of like he's been in a minor part in all three movies, he's kind of become a bit of a fan favorite among people who are enough of a geek to notice this kind of thing. I read somewhere on the internet, because I'm a geek, that he had decided not to return, that they had offered him to return to Episode 7, but he did not. And there are conflicting reports on this. One report was that he said, it was just too boring. Another report is that they didn't offer him enough money, or it would have been too much travel for just a brief cameo. And then he didn't show up for Episode 8. And I guess whatever the issue had been in the first two ones, they got it sorted out for Episode 9, because there he is back again. And I had read on the internet that he would be back. So I was looking forward to seeing him back. But boy, did they... What a lousy cameo that was, huh? I mean, having heard that he was going to be back, I fully expected there would be a Wedge moment where, there would be some sort of thing that was going on and everyone was in trouble, and here comes Wedge out of nowhere to save the day, and everyone's like, oh, it's Wedge. But all you get is you get one shot of him in the cockpit saying, "Nice shooting, Lando." And that's it. You don't get to see him do anything. You just get a shot of him saying, "Nice shooting, Lando." And that's all the screen time and that's all the lines he gets. So I know this movie already has too much stuff going on as it is, but what's the point of that? I mean, if you're going to do, if you're going to bring him back, then bring him back. I mean, give him a few more lines. Have somebody say, "Oh, look, it's Wedge." Have him shoot something. I don't know. He doesn't need a big part, but he needs a bit more than that. And you know, like if you can't bring him back for whatever logistical reasons, the actor refuses to do it or whatever, I can understand that. But if you've got him, and then that's all you make use of him, I don't understand that. Same goes with Wicket. And I know, like, not everyone likes the Ewoks, but, you know, I grew up with the Ewoks. I've got nostalgia for him. But that cameo was so pointless. I mean, like, I'll take it over nothing. I'm that kind of fan. Anything is better than nothing. But, you know, it occurs to me, they were going to a moon right outside of Endor, right? Why couldn't that moon have been Endor? And why couldn't those scavengers that helped them have been the Ewoks? I mean, you could have worked them back into the plot. You could have worked them back into the plot, is what I'm saying. And I know people are going to say, "Oh, that's fan service," but I don't think so. I think, I mean, I'm going to repeat myself, but I think bringing back old characters is just what you do in a franchise. I don't think we need to be ashamed of that as being kind of fan service or something like that. That's the reason we're paying our money to see this instead of seeing some movie we never even heard of, is because we're expecting to see these old characters come back again. So I don't know. I'll take it, but yeah, that was a bit of a disappointing cameo. Okay, so all that out of my system, what did I like about this movie? Well, I don't know if there was anything I really liked. I don't know. There were a couple of moments when the music swelled that I felt myself getting into it a little bit. But I guess what I liked is that I don't feel like it ruined anything for me. You know, like, I feel like it's an end to the trilogy. And yeah, I know people are saying that it's walking back stuff Rian Johnson had set up. And it does a bit, but it's relatively coherent. They give reasons for why they're walking back stuff. And I think also as well, yeah, you know, it's the last movie in the trilogy. You've got to expect that they're going to do something like this big shoot 'em up type stuff. They had the same problem with Return of the Jedi, right? How to, you know, you set all this stuff up, but then the last movie, you've got to start kind of closing things down and say, okay, but the place to go, with both of these trilogies, the place to go in interesting and new directions is the first and second movie. Then with the third movie, you've got to start wrapping stuff up. And the third movie is not the place to do all this inventive stuff. And unless you're really clever and you can pull it off. But it's a little bit too much to ask that they be super clever all the time. Some of these movies are just going to be average. And this one was average, but it was average. You know, like it wasn't terrible. So, yeah, what else do I want to talk about? But bear with me. This is the disadvantage of doing this unscripted. I know there was some other stuff I wanted to mention. Yeah, oh yeah. Sorry, I'm going to go back to another thing that bugged me a little bit. Is this constant battle between Rey and Kylo Ren. Where, you know, we had this really dramatic face-off between them in episode 7 and episode 9. And by this episode, the lightsaber battles between them are just kind of getting a little bit boring. I mean, we've already gone through all this. And they're it's just, I mean, I know to a certain extent these lightsaber battles in Star Wars have never really been about the lightsaber battle. They've been about the dramatic tension between characters.